Hi, Shavua Tov, Wrapunzel ladies. I wanted to say Shavua Tov to you, which means good week. Here in Israel, Shabbat has just ended and we're about to start into the new week. My name is Penina Taylor and I'm one of the Wrapunzel ladies, as you know, and I just wanted to share a few ideas with you today, a few concepts and some thoughts that I had about head coverings and about my wrapping journey. So one of the things that I've thought a lot about in recent times, and you'll understand exactly how I got there when I tell you a little bit about where I've come from, but was this idea of why is it that we as women are so concerned about what other people think about how we look. You know, when we read the messages that come through the Facebook group, a lot of times people will say, I'm going outside for the first time wearing a scarf, wearing a wrap, and I'm nervous about it. And we wonder, like, well, why are we so concerned about what we look like? Why are we so concerned about whether our eyebrows look good or whether we look good in makeup? Or, you know, we look for encouragement. And the ladies on this group are so amazing about encouraging each other. It's incredible. It's one of the beautiful things about the group. And the more I thought about it, I thought, you know, it's really not. At first glance we might think, well, it's all about being vain and we're too concerned with what we look like. And then I realized that the reason that we're so concerned about what we look like and how we present ourselves to other people is because we care about relating to other people. You know, as I look through, well, really through life, and I examine what motivates us and why we do the things that we do, there's one theme that seems to run through almost everything that has to do with human behavior, and that is that we are created to be connected beings. We care about other people and we want to connect with them, and one aspect of that is caring about how we present ourselves to them so that we can make that connection. You know, do I look in such a way that I will draw another person to me, or do I look in such a way that I will be able to make someone feel safe in my presence? One of the reasons that we look at other people and we kind of size them up sometimes and try to figure them out, what box can we put them in, it's not even so much about being judgmental as much as being, you know, is this a safe person to be with? When I look at this person, do we have enough in common that I can feel safe and open myself up to them and be able to connect to them on a more intimate level? And so we are very concerned with how we look and how we present ourselves and what message we put out there to the world. And that goes for the way that we cover our heads as well. So when I think about these concepts and I relate them to the covering journey that I have that I have been on, I've actually been on this journey for a very long time. I am a Torah observant, or what many people would call an Orthodox Jewish woman, and I have been such for the past 15 years. I was born Jewish, but I was not always observant. I didn't actually always know anything about my faith. But in the process of my growing and learning, I explored other faiths for a certain period of time, and actually it was when I was involved in Christianity that I began to explore the idea of covering one's head. And it grew with me and it became a part of who I was. So I've been covering my head now for about 24 years. And when I became an observant Jew, though, and I started to begin to share my personal story, which I'm not actually going to share with you here, but when I began to share my personal journey and my personal story in front of large audiences, I became convinced that the best way for me to cover my head, both because certain other people expected it and because it was just my personal opinion, was with a wig. And so I began to wear a wig, or what we call a sheitel in the Jewish community, and that is how I would go out and that is how I would present myself. And I was wearing a very nice looking wig, and so I looked very nice. And my head was covered, and the people in my community knew that that's what I was doing. And for the longest time I really didn't feel that I could perform or speak or teach in anything but a wig, in anything but a sheitel. And I began to, actually I met Rivka Malka Perlman, and then eventually Andrea, but I met Rivka Malka and I saw the beautiful way in which she was covering her hair with scarves, and I became interested in learning about covering my head with scarves. And so I started by experimenting here and there, and I got some scarves. And then when I moved to Israel, I discovered that there was a huge community of women. In fact, I would say probably the majority of women in Israel who cover their head wear scarves instead of wigs. Not that there aren't a lot of women that wear wigs as well, But I still had this idea that in order to look nice, in order to look put together, and in order to look professional, and therefore to be respected by the people that were interviewing me or listening to me speak, I needed to wear this wig. So even as I started to cover my head with the scarves, and I started to experiment and feel very beautiful in them, which I'll touch on that in a minute, I was still afraid that if I ventured out to a speaking event or something like that, that people would not respect me, that they would not consider me professional, and that I would not make a good impression. And so I would always put on a wig. One day we had an event, a family event. We were going into town, but it was casual. It was vacation, you know. And so I was dressed very casually, and I was wearing a scarf, and I looked very casual. And we were on our way to the bus stop, and I got a phone call from somebody who said to me, this Israeli news station wants to interview about a particular topic, and can you be here in 3 hours for this interview? And I said, sure, we're headed into Jerusalem. Anyway, I'll meet them where they said to meet them. So I looked at myself and I thought, okay, I can't go on TV, on national TV, dressed like this. So I ran back to the house and I changed my entire wardrobe, and I put on a sheitel, a wig, and I did up my makeup and everything, and I ran back to the bus stop, and we went into Jerusalem, and I did the interview, and the interview went well. But I started to think again about, why did I do that? Why did I feel so embarrassed about covering my head with a scarf when it is not only a perfectly acceptable way to cover my head, it is a beautiful way to cover my head, and there's no reason for me to expect that I would look anything less than professional. And so I began to think about that and began to venture out a little bit more, wearing it when I was teaching in certain situations. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with wearing a wig, there certainly isn't. But the idea that I feel like I have to let other people give me my own self-worth, tell me who I am, tell me whether or not I'm valuable based on what I have on my head, it sends the wrong message. Because when we cover our heads, there are a lot of women in this world who seem to think that if you cover your head, it's a sign that you are oppressed. You're being put in a box, you're being put down, you're being imprisoned by men or by religion or by whatever. And they regard head covering as a sign of oppression. And yet I have found, as I've thought through these things, that it's actually whenever we cover our heads, whenever we cover our bodies, whenever we exercise some level of modesty, what we're actually doing is not becoming oppressed, but rather empowering ourselves or exercising our own personal power. In fact, the rest of the world, especially the male world, has kind of sold women this bill of goods, this idea that in order to express your freedom, you have to expose more of yourself to the world. But when we cover our heads and we cover our bodies, what we're saying is I'm not going to allow you to make me into an object. If you want to get to know who I am, you're going to have to go a little further than the outside. You're going to have to actually get to know who I am. Ask me who I am. Ask me what I'm about. And so covering our heads and covering our bodies is a way of empowering ourselves and a way of making sure that when we make connections with other people, they're real connections, not based on a facade, but based on who we really are on the inside. So recently I had an experience which really just brought it all together, and that was I was invited to have a meeting. I was helping somebody in a political campaign here in Israel, and I was invited to be part of her team and to meet a handful of Knesset members. That's like Parliament or like Congress in the United States. And it was a very, important event, and I needed to put my best face forward because not only might I be on TV or be recorded or have pictures taken, but I was impressing politicians who might have an influence in my life in some way in the future, either with a job or who knows what. And so I thought about, well, what am I going to wear? And of course, my first instinct was to wear a wig, right? Because that's what I have been taught is the way that I would look professional and put together. But then I thought about what kind of message I wanted to give across. And in this case, I decided that I wanted to present myself as a woman who covers her head with a scarf. That I wanted to be who I was, I wanted to be me, and I also didn't want people to put me in a box. Because if I wore a wig, then they would decide that they needed to put me in a specific box. Of course, in Israel, they probably wanted to put me in a different box because of the scarf, but I decided that the best way to put forth who I was to dress professionally and to wear a very neat and nice scarf. And I was very nervous. In fact, I even wrote on the Facebook group, hey guys, please pray for me because I'm about to meet Knesset members and I'm wearing a scarf for the first time. And what I found was really very interesting, because I found that when I wear a wig, it's almost like I get to hide behind something. And when I'm wearing a scarf, when a person looks at me, they have to look at my face, they have to look in my eyes, and I have to be who I am, and the real me is what comes out. And in the end, not only did I feel totally comfortable and totally confident, but apparently I impressed the people that I was meeting with. So it was a really incredible experience, and it was a very freeing experience, and it was one that allowed me to see the fact that when we cover our heads and when we cover our bodies in a way that's respectful of ourselves, and that looks different for each person. What I choose to wear and what I think looks respectable to me may not be what you want to look like, but when we do that, what we are really doing is allowing our true inner self to shine through. And so I wanted to share that with you. I hope that in the future I'll have some other opportunities to share some other thoughts with you. But the idea that, I think one last thought. When I think about Wrapunzel, it's an incredible community because we have in this group Orthodox Jews, and of course the two ladies that started the company Wrapunzel, Andrea and Rivka Malka, are Orthodox Jewish women. And a lot of people feel that the group is an Orthodox Jewish group, and in many ways it is, but it's not. It's made up of, I don't even think half the women in the group are Orthodox. Some of you are Sikh, some of you are Christians, some of you are Catholics, some of you are Muslim, and I'm sure that I'm forgetting some things. We even have some ladies in the group that are pagan or consider themselves not religious. We have women in the group who cover their head because of medical issues, and there's a wide variety of reasons, and yet we've all found something in common that can bring us together. So in a way, the Wrapunzel community, with its beauty and the way that we all come together because of our common ground and our common desire to cover our heads for a variety of reasons, but the fact that we all come together and we encourage each other, and there's no offense taken, and everybody tries to be very loving and not only encouraging but respectful of each other's differences, and it's such a beautiful community that I feel like it almost represents a microcosm of what the world ideally should be like. So I just wanted to tell you that it's an honor and a privilege to be a part of this group, and I really have gotten to know so many of you and gotten to love all of you, every single one that I've gotten to see your pictures and the different things that you put on the group, and so I want to wish you a good week and a peaceful week, and I look forward to getting to know you all better in the future.